The neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat outside the dusty roadside diner, casting erratic shadows across the cracked asphalt of Route 17. It was just past midnight, the kind of hour when the desert wind whispered secrets through the Joshua trees, carrying the faint scent of sage and exhaust. Inside, Sarah Jenkins wiped down the counter for the umpteenth time that night, her hands raw from the cheap bleach that never quite masked the grease. At 42, she moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd long ago learned to bend, but not break. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, streaked with premature grey from years of double shifts and unspoken worries. The diner, Eagle's Rest, was her anchor, a relic from her father's era. But lately, it felt more like a sinking ship. A low rumble shattered the silence, growing into a thunderous roar that vibrated the formica tables and rattled the coffee mugs behind the counter. Headlights pierced the gloom like searchlights, illuminating the parking lot as a convoy of motorcycles pulled in. 10, maybe 12 bikes, their chrome gleaming under the moon. The riders dismounted with practiced ease, leather vests patched with faded emblems of the Iron Oath MC, a club born from the ashes of forgotten wars. Leading them was Ethan Hale, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, his face etched with lines that spoke of battles won and lost. His salt and pepper beard hid a scar running from jaw to temple, a souvenir from a roadside IED in some distant sandpit. He nodded to Sarah as he approached the door, the bell jingling like a hesitant welcome. Sarah's heart quickened, not from fear, but from the familiar pull of routine. For months now, these riders had become her midnight regulars. They'd roll in after long hauls from the border towns, dust-caked and weary, nursing black coffee that she poured without charging. It started innocently enough, one stormy night when their usual spot down the road was closed, and Ethan had slid a crumpled 20 across the counter, only for her to push it back with a smile. "On the house," she'd said. "You boys keep the roads safe." Lies, really. The Iron Oath weren't saints. But they weren't the monsters the headlines painted either. They were guardians, in their own rough way, escorting truckers through cartel shadows, pulling stranded families from ditches when no one else would. Tonight, the group settled into their usual booth, the vinyl seats creaking under their weight. Ethan took the end spot, his calloused hands wrapping around the steaming mug Sarah set down. The aroma of fresh ground beans mingled with the earthy tang of leather and motor oil, a scent that had woven itself into the diner's fabric over those long months. "Rough ride up from Tucson," he grunted, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over engines. The others, veterans like him, brothers forged in fire, murmured agreements, their eyes heavy-lidded but alert. Sarah lingered, refilling cups without a word, her own stomach twisting from the meager dinner she'd skipped to stretch the payroll. She'd never told them why she did it. The free coffees weren't charity. They were a quiet defiance against the void that had swallowed her life. 10 years ago, her husband, a state trooper named Mark, had vanished during a routine patrol near the border. No body, no closure, just whispers of corruption in the badges above him, a promise he'd made to her on their wedding day, echoing in her ears. "I'll always come back, Sarah, no matter what." But he hadn't. The diner was all she had left, teetering on the edge of foreclosure thanks to back taxes and a slumlord developer named Victor Kane, who eyed the property like a vulture. Kane's suits had been circling for weeks, offering pennies on the dollar, their threats veiled in legalese. Last month they'd slashed her tires as a warning, the metallic screech of the knife still haunting her dreams. As the bikers talked in low tones, stories of a recent run-in with smugglers hauling more than just goods, Sarah caught fragments. Ethan's voice cut through. "Promised the old man we'd watch the pass. Can't break that." It stirred something in her, a reminder of her own unbroken vow to keep Eagle's Rest alive, for Mark's memory, if nothing else. She poured another round, ignoring the ache in her feet, The way her reflection in the coffee pot showed eyes shadowed by exhaustion. One of the younger riders, a kid named Tyler with tattoos snaking up his arms, flashed her a grateful grin. "You're a saint, Mom. Most places would have booted us by now." The clock ticked toward 2 a.m. The convoy's engines cooling outside like sleeping beasts. Ethan stood, tossing a generous tip into the jar despite her protests, a habit they'd developed even if she waved it off. "See you next run," he said, clapping her shoulder lightly. His touch was paternal, steadying, the kind of loyalty she'd lost when Mark disappeared. As they revved up and faded into the night, taillights blurring into red streaks against the starlit horizon, Sarah locked the door and leaned against it, the diner's hum enveloping her like an old friend. Little did she know, those free coffees had woven a thread of debt, one that would pull them all back when the shadows lengthened. But dawn brought no respite. The next morning, as the sun crested the mesas in a blaze of gold, Sarah arrived to find the diner's windows smeared with red paint, crude words scrawled in dripping letters, "Sell or burn." Her hands trembled as she scrubbed, the acrid smell of chemicals burning her nostrils. Kane's men, no doubt, escalating their game. She called the sheriff's office, but the line went dead after a perfunctory promise to look into it. Isolation clawed at her. The diner was her fortress, her promise to Mark, and now it crumbled. Word spread like wildfire through the biker grapevine. By noon, a single motorcycle pulled up outside, a scout from the Iron Oath, eyes sharp under his helmet. He didn't speak much, just nodded and rode off. Sarah dismissed it as coincidence, pouring coffee for the lunch rush of truckers, the clatter of plates a fragile rhythm against her growing dread. Yet deep down, a flicker of hope stirred. The kind, born from quiet acts of kindness, the unspoken pacts that bound strangers into something more. As evening fell, the desert cooled, winds carrying the distant howl of engines once more. Sarah flipped the sign to "Open," steeling herself for another night. The rumble grew, not the familiar dozen, but a swarm, 50 bikes, maybe more, their formation tight and purposeful. Ethan led them, his face set like weathered granite. They dismounted in unison, a wall of leather and resolve, surrounding the diner like sentinels. "Heard you had trouble," Ethan said simply, his eyes locking on hers. "We don't forget debts or promises." In that moment, as the sun dipped low and painted the chrome in fiery hues, Sarah felt the weight lift, just a fraction. The free coffees, the late-night talks, they'd forged a family from the fringes, ready to ride for her when the world turned cruel. What began as small gestures was about to ignite into a reckoning, one that would test loyalties, unearth buried truths, and honor the silent vows that outlasted the storm. The desert sun hung low, bleeding orange across the horizon as the Iron Oath riders formed a protective ring around Eagle's Rest. Their engines idled like a low growl, the vibration humming through the gravel lot and into Sarah's bones. Ethan Hale stood at the diner's door, his silhouette framed by the fading light, broad shoulders squared against the encroaching dusk. The air was thick with the scent of hot metal and cooling rubber, mingling with the faint, bitter aroma of coffee grounds spilled earlier in her frantic morning cleanup. 50 pairs of eyes, hardened by roads and regrets, turned toward her, a silent vow etched in their stances. No words of grandeur, just the quiet resolve of men who'd learned loyalty in foxholes and forgotten corners of the world. Sarah stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron, the fabric stiff with dried paint from the vandalized windows. Her pulse raced, a mix of gratitude and wariness. These weren't her saviors in shining armor, they were outcasts, patched vests bearing the Iron Oath emblem, a clenched fist around a broken chain, symbolizing bonds that time couldn't sever. "You didn't have to come all this way," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Ethan's gaze softened, the scar on his face catching the light like a silver thread. "We ride for our own. Sarah, those coffees..." They weren't just brew, they were trust, and trust is a promise we keep. Inside, the diner transformed into a makeshift war room. The bikers filed in, boots thudding softly on the linoleum, careful not to overwhelm the space. Tyler, the young one with the ink that told stories of his own losses, a brother gone too soon in some overseas skirmish, took a seat at the counter, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm. The others spread out, maps unrolled across tables, grease pencils marking routes and potential trouble spots. Ethan pulled Sarah aside, his voice a low rumble over the murmur of plans. "Tell us about this Kane fella. We've crossed paths with types like him before, suits who think land is just paper to shuffle." She hesitated, the weight of 10 years pressing down. Mark's disappearance had left scars deeper than the desert cracks outside. He'd been chasing leads on a smuggling ring tied to local developers. Whispers of bribes and badges turned blind eyes. Victor Kane, with his slick office in the nearest town and a reputation for swallowing small businesses whole, had been at the center. "He wants the diner for some resort strip," Sarah explained, her words measured, eyes on the floor. "Says it's progress. But it's more. Rumors of backroom deals, folks pressured to sell. Last night. Those words on the windows. It felt personal." Ethan's jaw tightened, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He'd made his own promises in the war to fallen comrades. Watch the backs of those left behind. The Iron Oath was built on that, a family chosen from the wreckage, veterans and wanderers united by oaths that outlasted uniforms. As night deepened, the group pieced together the threat. A scout reported Kane's crew lurking near the county line, black SUVs with tinted windows, the kind that screamed hired muscle. The air grew tense, filled with the clink of mugs and the scratch of markers on paper. Sarah poured round after round, her movements automatic, but for the first time in months, the diner felt alive, not besieged. One rider, an older man named Jacob, with a limp from an old blast wound, shared a story over his cup, how the club had once stood guard for a widow's farm against a land grab, and turning the tide with sheer presence. "Ain't about fists," he said, voice gravelly. "It's about showing 'em you're not alone." Outside, the watch began. Riders paired off, patrolling the perimeter in shifts, headlights cutting through the inky blackness like beacons. Sarah watched from the window, the neon sign buzzing faintly overhead. The wind carried snippets of conversation, laughter mixed with strategy, bonds forged in the glow of taillights. Ethan joined her, leaning against the frame. "Your husband. He was one of us, in a way. Troopers like him, they ride the thin line. We heard stories back then." Sarah's breath caught. She'd never spoken of Mark to them, but the bikers' network was a web of whispers across the highways. "He promised he'd come back," she murmured, the words tasting like dust. "To keep this place going. For us." Ethan nodded, his hand resting lightly on the doorframe. "Promises like that don't die easy. We lost good men too, guys who swore they'd watch each other's six. When Kane pushes, we'll push back. Not with blood, but with the truth. We've got eyes in town, folks who owe us favors. Time to call 'em in." The conviction in his tone stirred something in her, a spark of the fire Mark had ignited years ago, before the shadows took him. For the first time, the diner didn't feel like a grave. It felt defended, a bastion of quiet honor. Dawn crept in slow, painting the sky in muted pinks and golds. The bikers revved to life, a symphony of engines that echoed across the mesas. But as they prepared to scatter, some to watch the roads, others to dig into Kane's dealings, a black sedan rolled up the access road, dust billowing like a warning. It stopped short of the lot, the driver stepping out with a briefcase in hand. Victor Kane himself, tall and impeccably dressed, his smile as sharp as a switchblade. He eyed the convoy with thinly veiled disdain, adjusting his tie against the morning chill. "Ms. Jenkins," he called. voice oily smooth. "This little show's over, I presume. Let's talk business. Sensibly." Ethan stepped forward, the group closing ranks behind him, a wall of leather and unyielding stairs. Sarah felt the shift, the air charged, not with violence, but with the weight of unspoken oaths. Kane's eyes narrowed, sensing the change. What he'd dismissed as riffraff now loomed as a force, rooted in loyalties deeper than his contracts. The confrontation hung in the balance, a pivotal moment where small acts of kindness rippled into waves of justice. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows over the lot, Sarah realized the free coffees had brought more than caffeine. They'd summoned a reckoning, one that would unearth secrets long buried and honor the promises that bound them all. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The morning light sharpened the edges of everything, turning the diner's parking lot into a stage of stark contrasts. Chrome glinting against the matte black of Kane's sedan, dust motes dancing in the sunbeams like hesitant witnesses. Victor Kane stood there, briefcase clutched like a shield, his polished shoes scuffing the gravel as he advanced a step. The air hummed with the low idles of the Iron Oath bikes, a chorus of restrained power that made the ground tremble faintly underfoot. Sarah felt it in her soles, a vibration that mirrored the quickening beat of her heart. Ethan Hale didn't move, his boots planted firm, arms crossed over his chest in a barrier of quiet authority. Behind him, the riders formed an unyielding line, their faces shadowed under helmet brims, eyes like polished steel. Kane's smile faltered for a fraction, but he recovered with the ease of a man used to bending others to his will. "Impressive turnout," he said, his voice carrying that practiced charm, laced with condescension. He glanced at Sarah, ignoring the wall of leather. "Ms. Jenkins, surely you see this is no place for theatrics. The offer stands. Fair market value for a property that's seen better days. Sign the papers, and we all walk away happy." The words hung in the crisp air, tainted by the faint exhaust lingering from the engines. Sarah's fingers tightened on the doorframe, the wood rough against her palm, a reminder of the diner's bones, her father's hands planing it decades ago, Mark's laughter echoing as he'd helped reinforce it. Ethan shifted, his presence drawing Kane's gaze like a magnet. "Fair? That's rich coming from a man who paints threats on windows in the dead of night." The biker's tone was even, but it cut through the tension like a knife through fog. Murmurs rippled among the riders, Tyler clenching his fists at his sides. Jacob leaning on his cane with a glare that spoke volumes. Kane's eyes narrowed, flicking over the patches on their vests, the Iron Oath emblem catching the light. "You people," he sneered, the mask slipping. "Outlaws playing hero. This is business, not some vigilante fantasy. The law's on my side. Permits, liens, the works. Step aside before you make this ugly." Sarah stepped forward then, her apron still dusted with flour from the morning's prep, the scent of baking bread wafting from inside like a defiant aroma. "Ugly? You've been making it ugly for months, Mr. Kane. Slashed tires, anonymous calls, now this." Her voice held steady, fueled by the unexpected solidarity around her. It was the first time she'd spoken up without fear choking her words. The biker's presence a shield that let her breathe. Kane's face tightened, a vein pulsing at his temple. He opened the briefcase, pulling out a sheaf of papers that fluttered in the breeze. "Read it yourself. The diner's collateral on those back taxes. One signature and it's done. Or to... consequences follow." The word hung heavy, evoking the slashed tires, the red paint dripping like blood in her nightmares. Ethan's eyes met Sarah's for a beat, a silent question. "Your call." She nodded faintly, the weight of Mark's promise surging through her. "Protect this place. Keep the light on for the lost souls who wandered in." No, she said simply, the syllable ringing clear. Kane's laugh was short, bitter, like cracking ice. You'll regret that. Folks like you always do. He snapped the briefcase shut and turned back to his car, but not before casting a lingering look at the convoy, as if recalculating the odds. As the sedan peeled away, kicking up a plume of dust that stung Sarah's eyes, the riders exhaled collectively. Ethan clapped a hand on her shoulder, the gesture warm and grounding, smelling faintly of leather and the road. He'll come at you sideways now. We need to move fast. Inside, the group reconvened, the diner filling with the low hum of voices and the clatter of chairs scraped back into place. Maps were consulted again, but now with fresh marks. Kane's office, the county records building, back routes through the canyons where his crew might lurk. Tyler sketched a quick diagram, his tattoos flexing with each stroke, while Jacob brewed a pot of coffee on the diner's ancient percolator, the rich, dark steam curling up like secrets unveiled. Sarah poured for them all, her hands steadier now, the routine a balm. As she handed Ethan his mug, steam rising between them, he spoke softly. Back in the war we had a code. No man left behind. Not for glory, but because you give your word, you carry it. Your coffees. They reminded us of that. Simple fuel for the fight. His words stirred memories she'd buried. Mark's own oaths, whispered in the quiet hours before his shifts, promising to shield her from the world's sharper edges. But the edges had found her anyway, in Kane's shadow. Now, with these strangers turned kin, she felt the first crack in that isolation. The day wore on, the sun climbing high and baking the lot into a shimmering haze. Scouts rode out in pairs, engines fading into the distance like echoes of resolve. Sarah manned the counter for the sparse lunch crowd, truckers who nodded approvingly at the bikers' presence, sensing the shift in the air. Whispers spread. The oath was here, and that meant trouble for the wolves at the door. By afternoon, a call came through on the diner's old rotary phone, the ring shrill against the quiet. It was a contact from town, a clerk in the records office who'd owed Ethan a favor from a long-ago assist, pulling his truck from a ditch during a blizzard. Kane's pushing a fast-track rezoning, the voice crackled, tied to some big investor from the city. But there's dirt, old complaints, payoffs that never saw daylight. Ethan's face hardened as he hung up, relaying the intel. The pieces clicked. Kane's empire wasn't just land grabs. It was laced with the same smuggling threads Mark had chased, corruption festering like rot under the desert floor. Sarah's breath hitched. Could this be the link? The reason her husband vanished, his cruiser found abandoned near the border, traces of a struggle but no answers. If we expose it, Ethan said, his voice a low thunder, it crumbles his whole play, but it'll stir the hornets. The riders nodded, a pact renewed in glances and grips of hands. Loyalty wasn't shouted, it was lived, in the choices that honored the fallen. As evening approached, the sky bruising purple, more bikes arrived, reinforcements from outlying chapters swelling their numbers to near 70. The lot transformed into a sea of chrome and resolve, engines cooling with sighs that blended into the wind's whisper through the sagebrush. Sarah watched from the doorway, the neon sign flickering to life behind her, casting a hopeful glow. Kane's sedan had been a gauntlet thrown. Now the oath picked it up. But in the quiet moments, as stars pricked the velvet sky, she wondered at the cost, the promises they'd all keep, the truths that might shatter more than just a developer's dreams. The reckoning was building, a storm of moral fire on the horizon, where small kindnesses forged unbreakable chains. The stars wheeled overhead like distant sentinels as the Iron Oath's camp settled into the night, a constellation of flickering camplights and glowing cigarettes dotting the diner's lot. The air cooled to a crisp bite. carrying the sharp tang of sagebrush and the underlying musk of oiled leather. Sarah stood at the edge of the gravel, her breath fogging slightly in the chill, watching the riders move with purposeful grace, some tending to bikes with wrenches that clinked like soft chimes, others huddled in low-voiced clusters, sharing thermoses of her strong brew. The neon sign hummed its eternal vigil, casting pools of red and blue across the scene, turning the ordinary into something almost sacred. 70 strong now, the oath wasn't an army, it was a brotherhood. Forged in the quiet fires of survival, each man carrying ghosts of promises made under duress. Ethan approached her quietly, his boots crunching the pebbles with deliberate slowness, a steaming mug in hand. "Can't sleep?" he asked, offering it to her. The coffee's aroma wrapped around her like a familiar embrace, dark and comforting against the uncertainty gnawing at her edges. Sarah took it, the warmth seeping into her palms, chasing away the night's encroaching doubt. "Not with Kane out there scheming," she replied, her voice a whisper laced with the weight of unspoken fears. Ethan's eyes, shadowed by the brim of his cap, held a steady light. "We've faced worse than suits with briefcases. Remember why we're here? Those coffees you poured weren't just kindness. They were lifelines on long nights when the road tried to break us." Inside the diner, the war room pulsed with subdued energy. Tyler pored over a laptop borrowed from a passing trucker, its screen casting a blue glow on his tattooed arms as he cross-referenced public records with tips from their network. "Got something?" he said, voice cutting through the murmur like a spark. The group leaned in, the scent of stale donuts and fresh ink mingling in the close air. Kane's rezoning push wasn't isolated. It tied into a web of shell companies, whispers of funds funneled from border halls, smuggled goods masked as legitimate trade. Jacob, nursing his bad leg in a corner booth, grunted approval. "Smells like the old days. Corruption dressed up as progress. Your husband?" "Sarah." He was sniffing around this, wasn't he? The question hung, pulling at the scar tissue of her grief. Sarah nodded, sinking into a stool at the counter, the vinyl cool against her thighs. Mark's face flickered in her mind, his easy smile before a shift, the way he'd trace her palm with his thumb, sealing promises with touch. He mentioned developers leaning on folks, badges looking the other way, said it was bigger than just land. Then he was gone. The words tasted bitter like overbrewed grounds, but saying them aloud in this circle felt like loosening a rusted chain. Ethan placed a hand on the counter near hers, not touching, but close enough to convey solidarity. "We pull this thread. It unravels everything. But it means going public, exposing not just Kane, but whoever's pulling his strings, risks for all of us." Dawn broke with a vengeance, the sun slashing through the eastern horizon in shafts of molten gold, illuminating the convoy as it stirred to life. Engines coughed and roared in sequence, a symphony that reverberated off the mesas, sending birds scattering from the Joshua trees. Sarah watched from the doorway, apron tied tight, as the riders mounted up, 50 heading out to shadow Kane's operations, 20 more staying to fortify the diner. The ground trembled under the thunder of departure, dust rising in swirling veils that caught the light like golden fog. Ethan lingered last, helmet under his arm, his face etched deeper by the night's deliberations. "We'll ride clean," he assured her. "No guns, no games, just truth and presence. You hold the fort here, pour that coffee like it's armor." The day unfolded in taut rhythms. Sarah flipped the sign to open, the bell jingling as locals trickled in, farmers with calloused hands, travelers seeking respite from the heat shimmering off the asphalt. Whispers followed the bikers' exodus, tales of the oath stand rippling through the booths like heat waves. One regular, an old rancher named Elias, with a face like weathered leather, slid a 10 across the counter unprompted. "Heard about the trouble. Those boys, they're good folk. Keep the light on, miss." His words bolstered her, a quiet ripple of community support she'd long forgotten amid the isolation. By midday, tension coiled tighter. A scout radioed in. Kane's crew circling the county offices, pressuring clerks with veiled threats, the air thick with the buzz of fluorescent lights and shuffling papers. Tyler, back from a quick run, relayed it over a hurried lunch of sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, the diner's fan whirring overhead like anxious breaths. They're rushing the vote on the rezoning. If it passes, the diner's gone by week's end. Sarah's stomach knotted, the clatter of silverware suddenly too loud, too fragile. But then, a breakthrough. Their town contact unearthed a file, Mark's old report, buried in archives, linking Kane to the smuggling ring. Traces of aggression at the scene of his disappearance, hints of a cover-up that reached into the sheriff's office. Ethan's voice crackled over the walkie-talkie as the sun peaked, baking the lot into a furnace. "We're en route to the offices, bringing the evidence. Stay sharp, Sarah." Her heart pounded, a drumbeat syncing with the distant hum of returning engines. She wiped the counter methodically, the bleach's sharp sting grounding her, visions of Mark's cruiser. Abandoned, doors ajar, flashing like lightning. This wasn't vengeance, it was redemption, honoring the oath he'd whispered to her under starlit skies. Protect what's ours, no matter the cost. As afternoon shadows lengthened, pulling the desert into amber hues, Kane's retaliation struck. A pair of unmarked vans rumbled into the lot, disgorging 4 men in dark jackets, their postures screaming intimidation. They fanned out, one kicking at a bike stand with a sneer, the metallic clang echoing like a challenge. Sarah stepped out, pulse thundering, but Jacob was there in an instant, his cane tapping the ground like a warning shot. "Easy now," he growled, the other stay-behinds emerging from the diner like ghosts materializing. The air crackled, thick with unspoken threats, the scent of sweat and aggression cutting through the sage. The leader spat on the gravel. "Tell your biker trash to back off. Kane's done playing." Before fists could fly, engines roared from the horizon, a dozen oath riders returning early, chrome flashing like drawn blades. They encircled the vans without a word, a ring of resolve that made the intruders falter. One by one, the men backed toward their vehicles, eyes darting, the dust settling like a held breath released. As the vans sped away, tires screeching on the access road, Sarah exhaled, the weight of the moment crashing over her. Jacob clapped her back gently. "See, loyalty's the best shield. Your man's promise lives in this." Twilight descended, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery streaks as the full convoy reassembled. Ethan dismounted, holding a folder thick with copies. Evidence compiled, ready for the county hearing tomorrow. His face bore the dust of the road, but his eyes burned with quiet triumph. "We got witnesses lined up. Kane's web starts fraying tonight." Sarah nodded, pouring fresh coffee into travel mugs, the steam rising like prayers. In the gathering dark, with engines idling and stars emerging, she felt the threads of fate tightening, not in destruction, but in the unbreakable bonds of chosen kin. The free coffees had summoned this storm, but it was honor that would see them through, unearthing truths that healed old wounds and forged new legacies. If this tale of quiet courage is stirring something in you, smash that like button below. It helps spread these stories of loyalty to more hearts that need them. The night air thickened with anticipation, a velvet shroud pierced by the low murmur of engines cooling in the diner's lot. Stars scattered like spilled diamonds across the ink-black sky, their cold light glinting off the chrome handlebars and leather saddles of the Iron Oath convoy. Sarah leaned against the doorframe, the wood still warm from the day's relentless sun, inhaling the mingled scents of cooling asphalt and the faint, acrid bite of exhaust that lingered like a promise unfulfilled. 70 riders now, their silhouettes a ragged horizon of resolve, shared quiet words around clusters of glowing embers, Cigarettes or small fires kindled in metal drums, casting flickering shadows that danced like restless spirits. The neon sign buzzed overhead, its hum a steady heartbeat against the desert's vast silence. Ethan Hale moved through the group with the ease of a commander who'd long ago traded ranks for roads, his salt and pepper beard catching the firelight as he checked in with each cluster. He paused by Sarah, handing her a worn thermos of water, the metal cool and beaded with condensation. "Hearings at first light," he said, his voice a gravelly anchor in the chill. "County seat 20 miles east. We'll ride in formation. Clean, no drama, but Kane's not one to fold quiet." Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing the diner's key in her pocket, the jagged edge a talisman of endurance. The folder of evidence weighed heavy in her mind, Mark's buried report, the threads linking Kane's land grabs to shadowed border dealings, hints of aggression that had swallowed her husband whole. It wasn't proof of miracles, but it was a crack in the facade, enough to let truth seep through. Inside, the diner glowed like a beacon, its windows fogged from the warmth of bodies and brewing coffee. Tyler hunched over the counter, his laptop screen a harsh blue island amid the dim yellow lamps, fingers flying across keys as he finalized digital copies of the documents. The air carried the rich, nutty perfume of a fresh pot percolating, steam curling lazily toward the tin ceiling. Jacob settled into his booth, Kane propped nearby, his lined face thoughtful as he unfolded a creased map of the county routes. "Back routes through the arroyos," he advised, voice low and measured. "Kane's got eyes everywhere. Sheriff's deputies on payroll, most like. We skirt 'em, arrive unseen." The others nodded, a ripple of agreement passing like a shared breath. Bonds tempered in the quiet hours before dawn. Sarah poured mugs all around, the ceramic clinking softly, each fill a ritual of sustenance. As she handed one to Ethan, their eyes met, and he spoke what hovered unspoken. "This ride? It's for more than the diner. Your man's oath to shield you, to keep the light burning, it echoes ours. We lost brothers to shadows like Kane's, promises broken by greed. Tonight we mend one." The words settled in her chest, warming like the steam rising between them. Mark's voice echoed in memory, soft against her ear on a porch swing years gone. "I'll always ride back, Sarah, for you, for this life we built." She'd clung to that through empty nights. The diner's counter her altar. Now, these outcasts, scarred by their own wars, carried it forward, a chosen family woven from free pause and late-night nods. Sleep came in fragments, the group rotating watches under the starlit vigil. Sarah dozed fitfully on a cot in the back room, the diner's hum lulling her like an old lullaby, dreams tangled with visions of taillights fading into dust clouds. Dawn arrived stealthily, the eastern sky bleeding pink and gold, painting the mesas in hues of renewal. Engines stirred one by one, a crescendo building from coughs to roars, the ground quaking as the convoy assembled. 70 bikes in tight formation, a serpent of steel and leather coiling toward the access road, headlights piercing the half-light like determined eyes. Sarah watched from the lot, apron discarded, her dark hair loose in the breeze that carried the sharp tang of dew-kissed sage. Ethan led the van, his broad frame steady on the lead bike, the iron oath patch a banner of unyielding honor. The ride east unfolded in rhythmic thunder, the desert blurring past in waves of ochre and shadow. Wind whipped at Sarah's jacket as she rode pillion behind Tyler, her arms wrapped around his waist, the vibration of the engine syncing with her pulse. The air rushed cool and alive, scented with wild creosote blooming under the rising sun, a stark contrast to the tension knotting her shoulders. They skirted the main highway, dipping into arroyos where canyon walls rose like silent guardians, muffling their approach. Whispers over helmet comms kept the line taut, scouts reporting clear paths. No tales from Kane's shadows. Yet doubt flickered. Would words and paper stand against a man who'd bent the law like a cheap wrench? The county seat emerged from the haze, a squat brick building huddled amid strip malls and faded billboards, its flag snapping crisply in the morning gusts. The convoy rolled in at precisely 8:45, engines cutting off in unison, the sudden silence amplifying the crunch of boots on pavement. Commissioner's hearing room buzzed with early arrivals, locals in worn denim, clerks shuffling agendas. But the air shifted as the iron oath filed in, a sea of leather filling the back rows. No disruption, just presence, broad shoulders, steady gazes, the faint aroma of road dust and resolve. Sarah took a seat up front, the wooden bench cool against her legs, heart hammering as Victor Kane entered from a side door, his suit impeccable, flanked by two stone-faced aides. His eyes locked on her, then flicked to the rear, widening fractionally at the unexpected force. The hearing commenced with procedural drone, the commissioner's gavel a sharp crack echoing off panelled walls. Kane's counsel rose first, voice smooth as oil, painting the diner as an eyesore, blocking vital progress, rezoning for resorts, jobs, a brighter future. Maps projected on a screen showed grand visions, glossing over the leans and pressures. Sarah's throat tightened, the room's stale air heavy with fluorescent hum and the undercurrent of bias. Then Ethan stood, his turn signaled by a nod from their local ally, a retired judge who'd crossed paths with the oath during a flood rescue years back. He approached the podium unhurried, the folder in hand, his gravelly timbre cutting through the murmurs. "We're not here for spectacle," Ethan began, eyes sweeping the panel. "We're here for truth. Miss Jenkins's diner isn't just bricks. It's a promise kept, a light for travellers, built on oaths that outlast paper trails." He laid out the evidence methodically. The buried report from a decade ago, links to smuggling fronts masked as development funds, patterns of coercion that reached into badges and backrooms. Tyler followed, projecting digital trails, shell companies dissolving like smoke, funds traced to border shadows. The room stirred, whispers rising like steam from a fresh pour. Kane's face paled, his fingers drumming the table's edge, the sharp cologne he wore now cloying in the charged air. Commissioners leaned forward, questions probing like flashlight beams into dark corners. One, a weathered woman with sharp eyes fixed on Kane. "These allegations, they demand scrutiny." The rezonings halted pending review. The gavel fell again, sealing the pause, but the victory hummed unspoken, a moral tide turning, not through force, but the weight of exposed light. As the room emptied, Kane brushed past Sarah in the hall, his whisper venomous. "This isn't over. You think bikers scare me?" But his eyes betrayed the fracture, the web trembling. Outside, the convoy reformed under the climbing sun, engines idling with triumphant purrs. Sarah mounted up behind Ethan this time, the wind of departure whipping her hair, carrying away the courtroom's staleness. The ride back traced golden canyons, the desert alive with possibility, the diner's future secured, at least for now, but deeper truths stirring. Mark's shadow loomed closer, hints in the files suggesting his disappearance tied to Kane's core, a cover for the ring he'd threatened to unravel. As taillights blurred into the horizon, Sarah felt the bonds tighten. Free coffees repaid in loyalty's currency, promises redeemed in the quiet roar of justice rolling on. Yet the horizon held one final shadow, a reckoning that would test if oaths could truly bury the past. The desert wind whispered through the canyons as the convoy thundered back toward Eagle's Rest, a ribbon of chrome and resolve cutting through the midday haze. Sarah clung to Ethan's back, the roar of his bike a steady pulse against her chest, the air rushing past thick with the scent of sun-baked earth and blooming creosote. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the road into a shimmering mirage, but for the first time in years, the horizon didn't loom like a threat. It beckoned like a promise fulfilled. Behind them, the iron oath stretched in disciplined formation, 70 engines harmonizing in a symphony of unyielding loyalty, dust trails weaving like golden threads in their wake. The courtroom victory lingered in the air, a fragile triumph, but Sarah sensed the deeper current pulling them home. The shadows of Mark's disappearance, now cracked open by the files they'd unearthed, demanding one final stand. They arrived at the diner as the sun dipped toward the mesas, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the gravel lot. The neon sign flickered to life with a familiar buzz, its glow a beacon against the encroaching twilight, illuminating the weathered facade that had held Sarah's world together through storms of grief and greed. Riders dismounted in a cascade of boots and helmet clicks, the air filling with the earthy tang of leather and the faint metallic bite of cooling exhaust. Ethan killed his engine last, swinging a leg over and offering Sarah a hand down, his calloused grip steady as the oaths that bound them. "It's not over yet," he said, eyes scanning the perimeter, the scar on his jaw catching the fading light like a badge of battles past. Kane's cornered. Men like him lash out when the walls close in. Inside, the diner enveloped them like an old ally. The scent of fresh coffee brewing on the percolator, mingling with the residual warmth of the day's baking. Biscuits left cooling on wire racks, their buttery aroma a quiet defiance against the chaos. Tyler spread the files across the counter, pages rustling like dry leaves in the fan's lazy breeze, while Jacob limped to his booth, Kane tapping a rhythmic warning. The group gathered close, shoulders brushing in the confined space, a tapestry of scars and stories forged from wars, both literal and metaphorical. Sarah poured mugs without pause, the steam rising in ethereal curls, each one a silent thank you for the family they'd become. Not by blood, but by choices made in the dead of night. Tyler's finger traced a faded photocopy, his voice cutting through the hush. This report, Mark's last dispatch. He wasn't just chasing land grabs, Kane's crew. They were moving more than dirt, border halls hidden under development fronts, the struggle at his cruiser, traces match a site near Kane's old warehouse, buried under permits that never checked out. Sarah's breath caught, the mug in her hand trembling slightly, hot liquid sloshing against the rim. Mark's face materialized in her mind, his steady gaze before that final shift, the way he'd kissed her forehead and murmured, "I'll ride back before the stars fade, Sarah. Keep the coffee hot." 10 years of emptiness, filled now with the sharp sting of near truth, a wound reopening to heal. Ethan leaned in, his broad frame casting a shadow over the papers, the lines on his face deepening with resolve. "We ride to that warehouse tonight. No confrontation, just eyes and evidence. If it's there, we bring it to light. For Mark, for all the promises greed tried to bury." Nods rippled through the room, a pact sealed in glances and grips of hands, the Iron Oath's emblem on their vests, a fist clutching a broken chain, gleaming under the diner's lamps like a vow etched in steel. Sarah felt it then, the shift from solitary grief to shared purpose, the free coffees she'd poured transforming into the fuel for this moral fire. These men, outcasts to the world, had become her guardians, honoring oaths that echoed Mark's own. Moonlight silvered the desert as the vanguard departed an hour later, 20 bikes slipping into the night like shadows, engines muffled to a low growl that blended with the wind's sigh through the Joshua trees. Sarah stayed behind with the core group, the diner's windows dark sentinels, watching the taillights fade into crimson points against the velvet black. The weight stretched taut, the clock's tick amplified in the quiet, broken only by the soft clink of mugs and murmured stories. Jacob recounting a brother's last stand in a far-off desert, Tyler sketching escape routes on a napkin stained with coffee rings, Hours blurred, the air growing heavier with each passing minute, scented by the faint, lingering perfume of sage drifting through the cracked door. Just past 3 a.m., the rumble returned, engines swelling like a distant storm. Headlights pierced the gloom, illuminating dust-caked riders who dismounted with urgent grace. Ethan led them in, his face grim but eyes alight with quiet victory, clutching a battered evidence bag sealed with tape. "It's there," he said, voice rough from the chill ride. "Old logs, manifests, Kane's name all over it, and something else." He handed Sarah a small, tarnished locket, its chain frayed but intact, the clasp bearing Mark's initials engraved in faded script. Her fingers closed around it, the metal cool and familiar. A piece of him pulled from the warehouse's forgotten corner where his cruiser had been stripped and stashed. No body, no final scene of violence, just confirmation. Kane's men had silenced him, staging the disappearance to protect their web, but the truth had endured, hidden like a promise in the dust. Tears traced silent paths down Sarah's cheeks, not of despair, but release. The weight of unanswered questions, lifting like fog, burned away by dawn. The group closed around her, hands on shoulders, a circle of solidarity that needed no words. By sunrise, the evidence reached their ally at the county prosecutor's office. A floodgate opened. Kane's empire crumbled in waves, arrests rippling through his network, the rezoning not just halted but revoked, the diner's title cleared of liens through seized assets. Victor Kane faced charges that peeled back layers of corruption, his sleek world reduced to a cell's stark walls. Justice served not with fists, but the unyielding light of exposed oaths broken. Weeks later, Eagle's Rest stood renewed, its windows sparkling under a fresh coat of paint applied by oath hands, the lot alive with the occasional rumble of visiting bikes. Sarah poured coffee as always, but now with a lightness in her step, the locket tucked safely in her apron pocket, a talisman of redemption. Ethan stopped by often, his presence a steady anchor, the brotherhood weaving her into their fold. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of crimson and gold, he raised a mug in toast. "To promises kept," he said, the words carrying the weight of all they'd ridden through. Sarah smiled, the desert wind carrying away the last echoes of shadows, leaving only the warmth of chosen family and the honor that outlasted the storm. "Thank you for riding along on this journey of loyalty and quiet courage. If these stories of unbreakable promises touch your heart, hit that subscribe button and join us for more tales that remind us what true family means. We'd love to have you in the convoy."